Have you ever witnessed a moment so small, yet so powerful, it could change the course of your entire life? Imagine a humble diner in the heart of a quiet American town. Picture a young black waitress, Ebony Johnson, who spots a lonely war veteran and decides to pay for his breakfast. An act of kindness, a fleeting moment of empathy. But it sets in motion a whirlwind of events that no one could have anticipated. Within 24 hours, roaring tank engines shake the streets, swirling rumors spark chaos, and a community stands on the brink of pandemonium. Buckle up for a jaw-dropping story of honor, betrayal, and redemption. Ebony Johnson considered herself an ordinary woman. She woke early every morning in her cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of Millfield, a quiet Midwestern town that rarely made national news. She stretched her arms wide, muttering a short, fervent prayer for strength and guidance. Then she hopped into the shower, savoring the last bit of hot water before her landlord's antiquated heater inevitably turned it frigid. Mornings were her private time to reflect. She'd gaze at the faded family photo of her parents, both gone now, but never forgotten, pinned to her bathroom mirror. Some days she prayed for resilience. Other days she prayed for joy. But mostly she prayed for the patience to navigate a life that hadn't exactly dealt her the best hand. By 6:00 a.m., Ebony, dressed in her neatly ironed black slacks, sensible shoes, and the crisp white button-down mandated by Harvest Moon. Diner, a beloved local spot that served the best coffee in Millfield. The diner uniform included a cheerful orange apron embroidered with the Harvest Moon logo. Ebony had taken extra care to wash and press it the night before. She wanted to look professional, no matter how small or unremarkable the world deemed her job to be. Harvest Moon Diner stood on Millfield's main street, nestled between a hardware store and a thrift shop. The old neon sign flickered from time to time, reminiscent of a bygone era. Inside booths lined the walls, each with its own set of chipped mugs and worn-down menus. The diner had been in operation for nearly 5 decades, originally owned by a local family who prided themselves on home-style cooking. Ebony took immense pride in her workplace, even though the pay barely covered her bills. The scratched countertops and squeaky vinyl seats gave the diner its character, like an old friend who might be rough around the edges, but consistently there for you. She greeted her co-workers, Darlene, the sweet older hostess, with a perpetual smile, and Mario, the tireless cook, whose gruff exterior hid a heart of gold. The usual morning crowd drifted in around sunrise truckers on their way to the next stop, early-rising seniors reading the paper over black coffee, and factory workers fueling up for a long shift. Ebony knew most of them by name. She took pride in remembering who liked extra cream, who needed gluten-free toast, and who always requested hot sauce on everything. Small details were her specialty. It was how she showed care in a world too busy for formal kindness. The day seemed ordinary enough. Ebony had no clue that fate was about to stir the pot. She carried a tray with 3 coffees expertly balanced, weaving through the crowded aisle like a seasoned dancer. As she handed off the beverages to a group of local farmers, she noticed someone slipping quietly into a corner booth, a stranger wearing a faded army jacket, the name Gibbs barely visible above the breast pocket. He had a faraway look in his eyes, as though stuck between here and another place, in time. Under the brim of a battered baseball cap, Ebony saw flecks of grey in his hair. He stared out the window, his posture rigid, his jaw set. People came and went around him, but he seemed oblivious. Ebony approached with her usual warmth, pen and pad at the ready. "Good morning," she said softly, so as not to startle him. "I'm Ebony and I'll be your waitress today. Can I get you something to drink?" He didn't look up at first, so Ebony repeated her greeting. Finally, he glanced at her dull eyes, betraying a lifetime's worth of stories he probably never told. He managed a small nod. "Coffee," he mumbled. "Black, please." And just like that, Ebony's life path began to shift. When Ebony brought his coffee, she tried to coax a conversation. "Are you from around here?" she asked politely. The man shook his head, offering only a quick "not anymore." She didn't press further. Instead, she gave him time to study the laminated menu. As the diner buzzed around them, she slid refills of coffee onto nearby tables and jotted down orders from the usuals. When she returned, the stranger still hadn't made a choice. He just stared at the menu, lost in thought. Gently, she nudged him. "Anything catch your eye, sir?" "Scrambled eggs," he murmured. "Toast bacon." The words left his mouth as though uttered on autopilot. Ebony promptly relayed the order to Mario. Some minutes later, Ebony served him the plate. He ate in near silence, only pausing to sip the coffee that Ebony kept refilling. She noticed the small patches on his jacket, a flag, a colorful insignia, a worn medal pinned near the collar. The details told her he was a veteran, someone who'd served his country, possibly seen and endured unimaginable things. When he finished, Ebony saw him rummaging through his pockets, frowning as if money were short. Without hesitation, she covered the check herself. A fleeting moment of compassion, an impulse born from her own struggles, empathy and gratitude. Little did she know it was a choice that would resonate far beyond the diner's walls. Ebony didn't announce her generosity. She simply slipped the paid receipt onto the counter when he stood up to leave. The older man stared at it for a moment, realization dawning on him that he owed nothing. His gaze darted to Ebony, confusion darkening his tired features. She placed a gentle hand on the worn sleeve of his army jacket. "Thank you for your service," she said softly. "Breakfast is on me today." A tumult of emotions rushed across the veteran's face. Surprise, gratitude, perhaps even embarrassment. His lips parted as if to speak, but words failed him. With a solemn nod, he whispered, "God bless you," and turned to the door. Ebony watched him leave, thinking she'd likely never see him again. She had no intention of broadcasting her deed. No pictures, no social media posts. In her heart, it was just a small gesture, a way to express gratitude to someone who had sacrificed for the country. As Ebony resumed her shift, she felt a strange satisfaction washing over her. But beneath that momentary warmth lay an odd twinge, a prickle of something that told her big wheels had begun to turn in the tapestry of her life. She just didn't know it yet. After clocking out, Ebony walked home under a sprawling twilight sky. The first stars winked into view, and a breeze carried the scent of cornfields from the outskirts of town. She replayed her morning interaction in her mind. Something about that veteran had touched her. His eyes were so distant, so filled with unspoken pain. She'd grown up hearing stories about her grandfather's experiences in the Gulf War. Ebony knew how deeply wartime trauma could scar a person's psyche. She reached her apartment, a compact unit in a rundown complex. The walls were thin. She often heard neighbors arguing or televisions blaring late into the night. She turned the key, stepped inside and flipped on the single overhead light. Exhaustion weighed on her like a heavy blanket. Still, sleep didn't come easily. Her mind raced. Why was she so unsettled? She had paid for a meal, nothing more. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the old soldier's gratitude hinted at deeper struggles. "God bless you," he had said, in a voice thick with sorrow and relief. Ebony tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable spot. Eventually she drifted into a dreamless slumber, unaware that by sunrise her life would be thrown into chaos tanks, soldiers and a media frenzy beyond anything Millfield had ever seen. At first light, the roar of engines shattered the usual sleepy hush. Residents awoke to the thunderous clank of armored vehicles rolling down Millfield's quiet Main Street tanks. Actual military tanks, flanked by Humvees and uniformed personnel. Passers-by gawked, phones held high to capture every surreal moment. Children stared open-mouthed from bedroom windows. Shop owners peered from doorways, uncertain whether to close up or stay open. By the time Ebony arrived at the Harvest Moon diner, a crowd had gathered outside. The diner's neon sign buzzed ineffectively against the morning gloom, overshadowed by the metallic behemoths parked along the curb. Soldiers stood guard, rifles slung over their shoulders, scanning the area with faces set in stoic lines. Ebony froze on the sidewalk. Her heart pounded. Was there some kind of national emergency? The diner's glass door swung open as Darlene stepped out, face ashen. "Ebony!" Darlene whispered, grabbing her by the arm. "You're not going to believe this. They're asking for you for her." Ebony's pulse quickened. Bewilderment churned in her chest. She weaved through onlookers, stepping carefully around the massive tank treads. At that moment, Ebony had only one clear thought. Everything was about to change. Inside the diner, the atmosphere was tense. Chairs were knocked askew. A few plates sat on tables, half-eaten. Most of the customers and staff had retreated to the corners or lingered near the entrance, eyeing the imposing figures in camouflage. Ebony recognized their insignias. They were U.S. Army affiliated with a division she had once heard was stationed in Fort Riley a few hours away. A tall officer with a stern expression stepped forward. His name tag read, Lieutenant Colonel Samuels. He cast a keen, assessing glance at Ebony. "Miss Ebony Johnson?" he asked, voice reverberating with authority. Ebony swallowed. "Yes, that's me." Wordlessly, the officer handed her a photograph. She stared down at it. The veteran from the day before, his face captured in a candid shot, wearing the same battered baseball cap and army jacket. Ebony's brow furrowed in confusion. I only saw him once," she stammered. "He came in yesterday." Lieutenant Colonel Samuel's jaw tightened. "He's a person of high interest," he said. "We have reason to believe he's involved in a sensitive matter. We need to ask you some questions." The words hammered into Ebony's consciousness. High interest. Her mind reeled, recalling the kindness she'd shown him. Never had she imagined it would spark such a confrontation, complete with tanks parked outside her beloved diner. Soldiers cordoned off a small section of the diner, and Ebony was guided to a booth near the back, away from curious eyes. The clink of her apron's metal buckles seemed deafening in the hush that settled over the diner's usual bustle. The lieutenant colonel slid into the seat opposite her, pulling a small notepad from his pocket. "We understand you spoke to this man," he said, tapping the photograph. "We need every detail." With shaky hands, Ebony tried to remember the entire exchange. She shared how he ordered scrambled eggs and bacon, how he seemed distant, how she paid for his meal when she noticed he might be short on cash. She recalled his words. "God bless you." The officer took notes methodically, occasionally glancing up to gauge her sincerity. "What else can you tell us? Did he say anything about his plans?" Where he was headed, Ebony shook her head vigorously. "He didn't say much. I just wanted to show kindness. I didn't know." Lieutenant Colonel Samuels silenced her with a wave of his hand. "You're not in trouble, but your cooperation is crucial." Ebony's mind spun. How had a good deed landed her in the middle of some government pursuit? The sense of dread in her gut grew, overshadowing any lingering pride in what she had done. After nearly an hour of questioning, the soldiers finally let Ebony go. She stepped outside into a bright morning sun that felt glaringly indifferent to her turmoil. The tank still rumbled on the street, drawing more onlookers by the minute. Some recorded videos while others speculated in hushed whispers. Ebony overheard snippets. They say some dangerous criminal is on the loose. I heard the waitress is involved. She's being interrogated. Could it be terrorists? This is insane. Ebony's co-workers hovered near the diner's entrance, offering anxious looks. Darlene wrapped an arm around Ebony. Honey, what on earth is happening? I wish I knew. Ebony replied, voice trembling. All I did was pay for his meal. I had no idea they'd come after me. Mario the cook scratched his head. Well, they've turned our diner into a spectacle. I'm worried folks will think we're some kind of hideout. Ebony could only imagine what the social media chatter might look like in a small town like Millfield. Gossip spread faster than wildfire. She felt the weight of every stare, every muttered question. Still, she forced herself to breathe deep. She had done nothing wrong. But was that enough to save her from the storm that was about to break by lunchtime? The harvest moon. Diner was the hottest topic in town. News vans appeared, including one from KMPC-TV, a local station typically more interested in school board meetings than national incidents. Their reporters set up cameras outside, capturing the bizarre image of military tanks lined along the curb. On social media, sensational headlines popped up. Mysterious veteran sparks, military intervention in Millfield, and local waitress at center of strange military inquiry. Some townsfolk rallied behind Ebony, praising her act of kindness and expressing outrage at what they perceived as an overblown response from the military. Others whispered, conspiracy theories. Maybe Ebony was involved in something deeper. Maybe that soldier was a dangerous fugitive. At the diner, Ebony continued her shift, a trembling lump in her throat. Each time a new wave of customers arrived, half of them more curious about the drama than hungry for eggs and coffee. She noticed how the tension frayed everyone's nerves. Tips were smaller or non-existent. Strangers threw suspicious glances her way. Even the regulars who'd known her for years seemed uneasy. She tried to keep a brave face, reminding herself that truth would ultimately come out, but a kernel of doubt gnawed at her. What if the situation escalated further? The presence of military tanks suggested something far bigger than a mere misunderstanding. Late that afternoon, Ebony slipped into the small break room, exhausted and emotionally spent. The constant swirl of reporters, soldiers, and curious patrons left her drained. She sank onto a creaky wooden chair, head in her hands. That's when her phone buzzed, an incoming call from a number she didn't recognize. "Hello," she answered warily. "Ebony Johnson," a faint voice said on the other end. "This is Corporal Lisa Brown from the U.S. Army, calling on behalf of the VA hospital in Topeka. We have your number on file as a next-of-kin contact for your late father." Shock flared through Ebony. Her father had passed away years ago, but he'd been a veteran too, stationed in Fort Bragg during his service. I don't understand. Why are you calling me?" There was a pause, and then Corporal Brown explained that Ebony's father's file had been cross-referenced with an ongoing investigation. The name Ebony Johnson had popped up in the system earlier that day, when the Army had started looking into the man Ebony had served at the diner. "We're not accusing you of anything," Corporal Brown added gently. "But your father's record might be relevant to understanding this man's connections. We just need some background." Ebony pressed the phone to her ear, heart hammering. Why was her family's history now part of this puzzle? Suddenly, her father's military past felt closer than ever. as though pulling her into a story she had no intention of writing. That evening, as the diner closed, Ebony sat in the silence of empty tables. The neon sign buzzed, flickering the word "open," though they were clearly closed. Darlene had left. Mario had locked up the kitchen, and Ebony was alone. She pulled out the photograph Lieutenant Colonel Samuels had shown her, now etched in her memory. The older man, the one she'd served, wore that battered cap and a haunted expression. Who exactly was he? If the army was so intent on finding him, maybe he wasn't just a struggling veteran. Perhaps he carried secrets, classified details, or a high-level clearance. Ebony felt a chill. Could he be dangerous? But she remembered the slight tremor in his hands as he drank his coffee, the sorrow in his eyes. She couldn't reconcile that with a hardened criminal. Still, secrets had a way of warping reality. With trembling fingers, Ebony texted a close friend who lived across town. "Need to talk. Big trouble, are you free?" She pressed, send her mind swirling with questions. Outside the tanks remained parked like silent guardians. Up and down Main Street, traffic was sparse. Few people dared drive near the looming military presence. Ebony locked the diner's door behind her, wishing she could as easily lock up her fears. Tomorrow, she told herself, might bring answers. The next morning, Ebony arrived early, determined to face whatever awaited. She found Mario in the kitchen, methodically cracking eggs into a mixing bowl. He looked up, eyes brimming with concern. "Hey," he muttered, wiping his hands on his apron. Ebony forced a smile. "Morning, I appreciate you sticking around yesterday. Things got complicated." Mario placed the bowl aside and sighed. "I need to tell you something, Ebony." He pulled out a chair, gesturing for her to sit. "Remember how I worked at the diner in Phoenix before moving here? We had a situation once with a patron who turned out to be AWOL from the army. The military tracked him down by following credit card receipts and witness statements. The diner I worked at got swarmed by investigators, kinda like here." Ebony blinked in surprise. She had no idea Mario had experienced something similar. "So you get why I'm so freaked out?" she said. Mario nodded gravely. "It might take time for them to clear things up, but if that soldier you served has top-secret baggage, they won't rest until they find him." Fear prickled across Ebony's skin. Was she about to see her life turned upside down for the second time in 2 days? Mario's confession echoed in her mind, fueling a renewed sense of unease. She wasn't alone in this, but that did little to quell her mounting anxiety. By mid-morning, the press was in a frenzy. Word had spread that Ebony was the waitress involved, turning her into a reluctant focal point for local and even regional news. Camera crews loitered outside the diner, and Ebony couldn't exit without being bombarded by questions. She tried to deflect them politely. "Are you working with the military? What did he say to you before he left? Has the army threatened you?" Each query stung, as though they expected Ebony to hold some massive secret. In the back of her mind, she wondered if her simple act of covering a meal would be painted as something sinister by a ravenous media looking for headlines. She dreaded how easily reputations could be shattered in the court of public opinion. Between interviews, Ebony managed to serve a few customers. A couple offered words of encouragement. "We're praying for you," while others aimed suspicious stares or demanded to know the inside scoop. Darlene and Mario did their best to shield her, but Ebony still felt cornered at every turn. At noon, Ebony spotted her boss, Harold Fisher, stepping into the diner, face tight with worry. If this fiasco continued, it could cost the diner business. Ebony suspected Harold might hold her responsible. She braced herself, unsure whether she'd leave this day with a paycheck or pink slip. Harold Fisher wasted no time. He pulled Ebony aside, expression grave. Listen, Ebony. I know you didn't mean for this to happen. But it's hurting our bottom line, he said, arms folded across his chest. Customers are scared away by the tanks and the media. We're losing money. Ebony's eyes prickled with tears of frustration. I didn't ask for any of this. She managed, voice tight. I only paid for a meal. Harold nodded, rubbing his temple. I know. But sometimes small acts have big consequences. I've got to think about the diner's future. If we stay under this microscope much longer, I might have to close up shop indefinitely. Close harvest moon. Ebony repeated, shock rattling her. She couldn't imagine Millfield without the diner. This was her livelihood, and a community staple for countless others. Harold hesitated, seeming torn. I don't want to do that, he admitted. But Ebony, I need you to consider taking some time off until this blows over. Maybe then the press and the military will back off. Her cheeks grew hot with indignation. She had never felt so powerless. You're telling me to disappear? Harold sighed. For your own good and for the diner. And just like that, Ebony's already precarious world threatened to spin further out of control. Feeling deflated, Ebony grabbed her coat and stepped outside for fresh air. She'd always prided herself on her work ethic, rarely missing a day of work. Now her boss was urging her to vanish. Outside, the media sharks prowled, but Ebony slipped past them, weaving through side streets until she found a quiet bench near the park. She sat down, trying to collect her thoughts. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Reluctantly, she answered, "Hello, Ebony." Johnson asked a soft, steady voice. "This is Dr. Anita West from Walter Reed, National Military Medical Center. I've been informed that you came into contact with a certain ex-Sergeant First Class Robert Gibbs." Ebony's breath caught. "Yes, I served him at the diner." "I don't know him personally." Dr. West hesitated. Sergeant Gibbs was under treatment at Walter Reed for severe PTSD. He disappeared 2 weeks ago, against medical advice. We're all very concerned for his well-being and the security of information he might carry. He hasn't been well. Ebony felt a surge of pity mixed with alarm. He seemed troubled, but... Is he dangerous? Dr. West paused. He's deeply traumatized. It's imperative we find him and bring him back safely. Ms. Johnson, anything you can do to help us locate him might save his life. A glimmer of hope sparked inside Ebony. If she could aid in safely resolving this, maybe life in Millfield and at the diner could return to normal, Ebony decided she couldn't just sit around and let the situation fester. She wanted to help. If Robert Gibbs was indeed a missing PTSD patient, he might still be wandering nearby, lost in his own nightmares. She remembered his haunted look, like someone searching for a way out, but finding only locked doors. She roamed the town on foot, scanning each storefront, each park bench, each quiet alley. She asked questions at the gas station, at the pharmacy, at the local shelter. Did anyone see a middle-aged man with a battered army jacket, maybe looking disoriented? Most shook their heads, though a handful claimed they'd glimpsed someone like that wandering near the old train depot 2 nights prior. The search consumed her, driven by equal parts concern and desperation. If she could find him, or at least point the army and the hospital in the right direction, maybe the spotlight on her and the diner would fade. Maybe she could get her life back. But as dusk approached, Ebony's efforts yielded no hard leads. She trudged home, muscles aching, spirit deflated. Tomorrow, she told herself, she'd try again. For now, she prayed that Robert Gibbs was safe somewhere out there in the sleeping town. The next morning, Ebony set out again, determined to keep searching. The crowds around the diner had thinned slightly. Perhaps the national spotlight had yet to lock onto Millfield, but a handful of military vehicles still lingered, and Ebony felt their presence like a heavy cloud over the town. She decided to check the old train depot, rumored to be a frequent refugee for transients. It was a crumbling building at the edge of Millfield, where trains rarely stopped anymore. She walked along the deserted tracks, the air cool and still. Then she heard its soft footsteps scraping against gravel. A figure appeared around the corner of the abandoned station. Face hidden in the dim light, Ebony froze. "Hello," she called tentatively. The person stepped closer, revealing himself to be a young man in ragged clothing, not the older veteran she sought. He eyed Ebony warily, as if expecting trouble. "Who you looking for?" he asked, voice raspy. Ebony relaxed slightly. "A friend. He wears an old army jacket. You haven't seen him, have you?" The young man shook his head. "No, but I saw the army trucks in town. They after him." Ebony nodded, swallowing a lump of apprehension. The young man sighed, looked down at his worn sneakers. "If he's hiding, Bet, he's spooked. Those tanks would scare anyone." And that was all the conversation he offered, before retreating into the shadows, leaving Ebony standing by the tracks, uncertain if she was closer to answers or just running in circles. That evening, Ebony dragged herself back to her apartment, shoulders slumped in defeat. She'd spent hours fruitlessly wandering town, feeling eyes on her wherever she went. Her phone had rung multiple times. Reporters, random callers, the army, she'd answered, none of them too drained to handle another interrogation. All she wanted was a moment of peace. She flipped on the lights in her apartment, intending to drop onto her sofa and pretend the day never happened. But she stopped short. Someone was there. A figure stood by her small kitchenette, sipping a glass of water. Ebony's heart slammed in her chest. Fear shot through her. Was this an intruder? Then the figure turned, and she recognized him. Robert Gibbs, the man whose meal she'd paid for the man whose face now haunted every corner of her life. He wore the same army jacket, but his eyes, those eyes seemed even more hollow, ringed with darkness, as if he hadn't slept in days. Ebony's first instinct was to grab her phone and dial 911, but something in his expression, pleading, terrified, made her hesitate. He raised a hand in a calming gesture. "Please," he whispered, voice raspy. I don't know where else to go." And just like that, Ebony found herself standing face to face with the man who had turned her life inside out. For a full minute, neither spoke. Ebony's thoughts whirled. He'd broken into her apartment, but he looked desperate rather than violent. Was he armed? She carefully shut the door behind her, her heart still racing. The hush felt deafening. "I'm sorry," Robert finally said, eyes downcast. "I remember your kindness yesterday, how you paid for my meal. I had nowhere else to turn." Ebony took a cautious step forward, scanning him for signs of aggression. He seemed exhausted, unwashed, a man at the end of his rope. She recalled Dr. West's words about his mental state. "You need help," she said gently. He shook his head. "They want to lock me up. I can't go back. Too many nightmares." His voice cracked on the last word, revealing a fracture in his composure. Ebony felt her anger and fear softening into compassion. She recognized that kind of pain, the torment of trauma. She thought of her father, who had struggled similarly after his tours of duty. "Robert, the army is worried about you. They're not just here to punish you. Dr. West from Walter Reed said you need care." He flinched, as if her words burned him. "I can't trust them," he muttered, shaking his head. A tear slipped down his cheek. Ebony's eyes pricked with sympathy, her mind racing through the implications of harboring him. But her heart told her she couldn't just throw him out. Ebony offered Robert a seat on her worn-out sofa, then quickly locked her door, peering through the peephole to ensure no one had followed him. Adrenaline buzzed in her veins. She was harboring a missing veteran with a potential security clearance, possibly wanted by the military. It was the kind of scenario she'd only heard about in dramatic television plots. Now it was her reality. She brought Robert a glass of water and some leftover stew from her fridge. He devoured it hungrily, pausing only to mutter a quick thank you. Ebony perched on the edge of an armchair, mind spinning. If she called the authorities, they'd storm her apartment within minutes. Tanks might roll right up to her front door, turning her life into an even bigger spectacle. Yet if she did nothing, she was aiding a potentially unstable man. Would that make her an accessory? Ebony clutched her phone, hesitating. Slowly she typed a text to Dr. West. "He's here. He came to my apartment. He needs help. Please advise." Then she stopped, finger hovering over send. Was she betraying Robert by contacting the hospital, or was she saving him, possibly saving herself? In the end, Ebony pressed send. Part of her dreaded what came next, but some small, determined corner of her soul believed she was doing the right thing. Night deepened. Robert seemed calmer after a hot meal and a few minutes to catch his breath. He glanced around Ebony's modest apartment, the mismatched furniture, the single lamp casting warm light on the battered walls. It was clear Ebony didn't have much to her name, yet she'd chosen to share it with him. After a moment of silence, Robert spoke voice raw. "I wasn't always this broken," he said almost to himself. "I had a wife, a son. I was a sergeant, first class, in a forward unit. We did missions in places I'd rather forget." Ebony listened, heart heavy. She remembered how her own father never talked about certain missions. War leaves scars. She offered gently. Robert nodded, tears glistening. "I lost my squad to an IED. I wasn't there that day. I was on leave, burying my mother. When I came back, they told me the news. Survivor's guilt. It's like a cancer in my mind." He buried his face in his hands, shoulders trembling with silent sobs. Ebony's vision blurred with her own tears. She laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. She knew that ache, the heartbreak of losing loved ones, and the guilt that sometimes came from surviving. In that moment, they were no longer waitress and veteran. They were two souls bound by empathy and pain. At around midnight, a soft knock sounded on Ebony's door. Startled, she got up, tiptoed to peek through the peephole. Outside stood a woman with short cropped hair, wearing a doctor's coat over jeans, and holding up a small badge to the lens. Ebony recognized her from an online photo she'd found earlier, Dr. Anita West. Ebony cracked the door open, pressing a finger to her lips to ensure Robert stayed quiet. Dr. West greeted her in a subdued tone. "I got your text. I came alone." Ebony let her inside, locking the door again behind them. Robert stood up, eyes wide and wary. Dr. West raised her hands, calmly. "Robert, I'm here to help," she said softly, her voice carefully modulated. "No uniform, no restraints. Just me." He trembled, uncertain. Ebony watched as Dr. West eased closer, speaking gently about the care he needed, how important it was to treat his PTSD, how others at Walter Reed truly wanted to see him. Well outside, a swirl of sirens shattered the hush. The faint rumble of engines indicated a possible return of the military presence. Ebony's stomach clenched. If they barged in, Robert might panic or worse. She prayed that everything would remain under control. The night air outside Ebony's apartment had grown heavy thick with tension and the low hum of armored engines. Inside the walls seemed to shrink with every second that passed. The muffled sound of boots on pavement echoed up from the street, mingling with the whir of diesel motors. From the narrow window, Ebony could see the silhouettes of soldiers moving in coordinated formation, their figures backlit by the harsh beams of tactical floodlights. The sight sent a jolt of dread through her chest. Robert Gibbs, now pacing in her cramped living room, looked like a man unraveling. His hands shook violently, and sweat beaded along his temples. He turned toward the door as though ready to bolt. "They found me," he whispered hoarsely. "I can't go back. I won't survive in one of their facilities. I'll disappear in some locked ward, forgotten." "Robert, you need to breathe," Ebony said, doing her best to stay calm, even as her own heart pounded. "Dr. West is here. She's on your side, and I'm not going to let this turn into a disaster." He shook his head violently, eyes wild with panic. "They have guns! Tanks!" "They're not here to negotiate." Dr. West, standing by the corner table with her medical bag slung over one shoulder, took a careful step forward. "Robert, listen to me," she said gently, her voice calm but firm. "No one is going to hurt you tonight. But if you panic, if you run, things could go wrong. That's why we need to work together now, to make sure you're safe." Outside, a loudspeaker crackled to life. A commanding voice boomed through the night. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Samuels. We are requesting the peaceful surrender of Sergeant Robert Gibbs. Step outside with hands visible. No weapons. No sudden movements." Robert froze. The color drained from his face. I can't go out there," he said, backing toward Ebony's bedroom. "I'll never come back." "If I do, Robert, wait." Ebony reached for him, her voice cracking. "They're giving us a chance to do this right. Don't make them come in after you." But he was already moving, slipping into the darkened bedroom, heading straight for the closet. "Please," Ebony said, following him. "If you hide, they'll think you're resisting. I told them we'd cooperate. You have to trust me." Inside the closet, Robert crouched low behind hanging jackets, arms wrapped around his knees. His breathing came in shallow, erratic gasps. It reminded Ebony of a cornered animal, terrified, reactive, dangerous if pushed. She turned back to Dr. West, whose face had grown pale. "We need to stall them," Ebony said urgently. "Give him just a few minutes. If he calms down, maybe we can talk him out. Peacefully." Dr. West nodded, already, pulling out her phone. "I'll call Samuels." Outside, the soldiers stood ready. Though their rifles remained slung across their backs, the tension in their posture said they were prepared for anything inside. Ebony cracked open her window and leaned out, just enough to speak without raising her voice too high. "Colonel Samuels," she called. "Please, he's scared. Give us 5 more minutes. Let Dr. West work with him." There was a long pause. Then the loudspeaker replied, softer this time. 5 minutes, but we will not wait longer without action. Ebony returned to the closet and sat down on the floor just outside it, her back against the wall. "Robert," she said gently, "do you remember what you told me? That I saved your life that morning. I need you to let me do it again. But you have to meet me halfway." "From the darkness," his voice cracked. "I don't want to die in a jail cell." "You're not going to," she said firmly. "Dr. West promised to stay with you. No chains, no cuffs, no uniforms, just care. But if you make them come in here, all that will go out the window." A long silence followed. Then slowly, Robert's form emerged from the shadows. His shoulders sagged in defeat, and tears streamed silently down his face. "I'm so tired," he whispered. "I just wanted to disappear." Ebony stood, tears threatening in her own eyes. "You don't need to disappear, Robert. You need to heal." She extended a hand, and after a long, agonizing moment, he took it. Together they walked down the hallway toward the lobby. Dr. West followed her bag at her side, her hand lightly pressed to Robert's back for reassurance. As the apartment door opened, the beam of several flashlights met them. Ebony held her hand up quickly. "He's coming willingly," she called. No need for force. Colonel Samuel stepped forward, eyes fixed on Robert, but his voice was even. "Sergeant Gibbs," he said, "thank you for cooperating." Robert said nothing. He just nodded, still holding Ebony's hand like a lifeline. Dr. West stepped in. "I'll take it from here, Colonel. He's my patient now." Samuels looked from her to Ebony, then back to Robert. He gave a curt nod. Understood. And just like that, the soldiers stood down. The Humvees remained in place, but the rifles stayed lowered. There was no tackle, no sirens, no chaos. Only the soft sound of tired footsteps echoing through a hall that for the first time in 2 days felt like it might finally fall quiet. Lieutenant Colonel Samuels agreed to meet in the lobby of Ebony's apartment building. Rather than bursting into her unit, Ebony led Dr. West and Robert, still trembling, but trying to hold himself together. Down the narrow hallway, every creak in the floorboards made Ebony jump, as though each step might trigger chaos. When the trio reached the lobby, they found Samuels waiting with 2 other officers. Their rifles remained slung on their backs. Not aimed, Samuel's gaze swept over Robert, lingering on the man's tear-streaked face. For a moment, Ebony thought she saw flickers of compassion in the officer's eyes. Robert visibly braced himself for condemnation or physical restraint. Instead, Samuel spoke softly. "Sergeant Gibbs, we need to return you to Walter Reed for your safety. No one wants to hurt you." Dr. West stepped forward, placing a hand on Robert's arm. "I'll personally oversee his treatment. No sedation unless absolutely necessary. Just a safe environment for him to heal." Robert swallowed hard. Slowly he nodded. Ebony exhaled, relief flooding her. Finally the standoff was coming to an end. She dared to hope that her life and the entire town could soon return to some semblance of normalcy. The following morning, Millfield awakened to a different kind of storm, not of tanks or sirens, but of headlines. Ebony Johnson's name was everywhere. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Alerts stacked across her screen, news articles, tagged posts, comment threads, even voicemails from unfamiliar numbers. The photos were all the same. Her tear-streaked face illuminated by porch light as she escorted Robert Gibbs to the waiting hands of military officers. But it wasn't the photo that mattered. It was the narrative. Waitress harboring fugitive veteran, sparks military standoff, hero or accomplice, small-town diner employee at center of national security scandal, Ebony Johnson, patriot or pawn. The internet had made its decision, and it wasn't kind. Ebony stepped outside to retrieve her mail, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes pressing against her. Her neighbors, once friendly, now glanced away. Someone had chalked "traitor" on the sidewalk a few buildings down. Even the children who once waved to her on their bikes now passed by in silence. Back inside her apartment, Ebony sank onto the couch and stared blankly at the TV. The news anchors used phrases like unclear motivations, unvetted associations, and moral gray areas. None of them called her by name with kindness. None mentioned the trembling veteran, the war trauma, the kindness that started it all. It was all spinning out of control. At noon she got the call. It was Harold Ebony. He began, voice heavy with weariness. "Can you come by the diner? We need to talk." She hesitated. About my job, a pause. Yes. Her stomach dropped. When she arrived at the Harvest Moon, diner, the place looked the same. Old neon, buzzing, same cracked linoleum tiles. But the soul of the place felt altered. Customers whispered over their menus. A camera crew loitered outside, half-heartedly, hoping for another dramatic twist. Harold was waiting near the back, his face drawn and pale. "I want to start by saying, I'm sorry," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "You didn't do anything wrong. I know that. You acted out of compassion, but the reality is this is killing our business." Ebony felt her throat tighten. "You're letting me go." Harold winced. "I've received dozens of calls. Angry customers. Board complaints. We've had 3 regulars cancel their event reservations. My staff is being harassed. People are saying we're a harbor for radical sympathizers. I can't afford to keep losing this much ground. I paid for a man's breakfast." Ebony said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's all I did." "I know," he said, eyes full of sorrow. "But in this world, kindness can come at a price." He handed her an envelope, 2 weeks' severance in cash. It felt like blood money. As she walked out of the diner, her diner, Ebony felt the loss not just in her wallet, but in her spirit. The job hadn't made her rich, but it had given her structure, purpose, belonging. Now she was untethered, and worse, marked. Outside, a small group of protesters had gathered, holding up cardboard signs with slogans like, "Jail the traitor," "Waitress," "Support our vets," "Not our enemies." Millfield deserves better. Ebony tried to pass unnoticed, but one woman shouted, "She's the one. That's her." All eyes turned. Phones came out. Ebony didn't run. She didn't hide, but she walked home in silence, head held just high enough to hold back the tears. That night she sat at her kitchen table with her father's photo in her hand, creased, faded, but still clear. A young black man in uniform standing tall with pride. "Would you have done it too?" she whispered to the photograph. "Would you have helped him?" She knew the answer, and it didn't make the hurt go away. But it reminded her why she had made the choice. Word of Ebony's firing spread like wildfire through town. The diner's once friendly atmosphere turned sour. Regular customers took sides. Some boycotted Harvest Moon in solidarity with Ebony, accusing Harold of cowardice. Others praised the decision, believing Ebony had jeopardized the town's reputation. Social media lit up with arguments. On one popular Millfield Facebook group, a heated debate raged. A local mom, huh? Ebony did a good deed. She doesn't deserve to lose her job. Shame on Harvest Moon. Patriot lover. She aided a deserter. The army was after him for a reason. She should face consequences. A truth seeker, we don't know all the details. But Ebony took him into her home, so it seems suspicious. The entire town seemed locked in a moral struggle over Ebony's actions. Some local businesses quietly refused to serve her. Meanwhile, others invited her to come by for a free meal or offered words of support. Yet Ebony felt battered by the conflicting energies. She had tried to help, tried to be compassionate. Her father had instilled in her the value of supporting veterans. Now she stood at the eye of a divisive storm, with no clear end. Weeks passed. Ebony pored over job listings, but the negative press dogged her, causing potential employers to hesitate. Her landlord started hinting about late rent, and Ebony's savings had never been ample to begin with. Each day brought new stress, new fears. Then one afternoon, her phone buzzed. She picked it up reluctantly, half expecting another crank call. Instead, she heard Dr. West's voice. "Robert wants to speak with you," she said gently. "He's making progress here at Walter Reed. He insists on thanking you." Ebony's chest tightened. A swirl of emotions, relief, gratitude, even lingering anger whirled within her. Part of her blamed Robert for the chaos that had upended her life. But another part still empathized with his trauma. Accepting Dr. West's offer, Ebony soon found herself on a video call from the quiet of her apartment. The screen flickered, revealing Robert in a hospital room. He looked better, less gaunt, more aware. "Ebony," he started, voice trembling. "I am so sorry for all the trouble I caused you. You saved my life, and I cost you your job." Ebony swallowed hard. The sight of him safe and receiving care tugged at her heartstrings. "I'd do it again," she said softly, meaning every word. A few days after her call with Robert, Ebony woke to find her phone flooded with texts. People were sharing a heartfelt interview. Dr. West and Robert had gone on KMPZ TV to discuss the situation. Robert spoke candidly about his struggles with PTSD, how Ebony's kindness might have been the only thing that prevented him from harming himself. Dr. West stressed the importance of community compassion for veterans, and Ebony's name came up repeatedly as an example of empathy in action. Suddenly the narrative shifted. News outlets that had vilified Ebony began hailing her as a good Samaritan. Blogs and social media posts that once spewed mistrust now called for a public apology from the diner and from the outraged townsfolk. Some cynics remained unconvinced, but the tide of public opinion began to turn. In an emotional gesture, Harold Fisher reached out, asking Ebony to meet at the diner. She hesitated, uncertain if she wanted to return, but curiosity won out. When she arrived, half the town seemed to be there, some holding hand-drawn signs that read, "We support Ebony and Heroes, help heroes." Standing on the diner steps, Harold, voice shaky, publicly apologized for his earlier decision, offering Ebony her job back with a raise. Tears blurred Ebony's vision. This community, her community, was finally standing with her, rather than against her. Sometimes, a single act of kindness can rattle the fabric of our everyday lives, spinning us into chaos, before leading us to an unimagined sense of unity. Ebony's compassion for a troubled veteran ignited confusion, suspicion, and hardship, but it also revealed the best in people, showing how empathy can transcend fear and mistrust. In the end, one small gesture became a beacon of hope, reminding an entire community that healing is possible through understanding and solidarity. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If you found this story moving or inspiring, please consider hitting the like button, sharing it with friends, and subscribing to our channel for more captivating tales. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories of resilience, compassion, and the profound ways a single moment of care can transform lives. Stay kind and stay tuned for our next gripping narrative.